Welcome to the Leaders of B2B podcast, a weekly show where we bring you interviews and in-the-weeds expertise with today's B2B experts and thought leaders. You can see more about today's episode and guest by visiting our website at leadersofb2b.com. This episode is brought to you by Content Allies. We help B2B companies launch revenue-generating podcasts. We schedule interviews between you and your ideal prospects and strategic partners. You show up for engaging conversations, we handle everything else. Ready to build a podcast that grows your business in just 1 hour per week? Reach out to us at contentallies.com.
Hey leaders, welcome back. This is Ledge. Today I am welcoming Sarah Tamilarasan. Sarah, it is so good to have you. I know you're coming from maybe sunny, sort of decent weather Houston. It's a little chilly here in Nashville. Thank you so much for hanging out. I would love if you would do a little hello and introduction of yourself and your work so the audience can get to know you.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Sarah Tamilarasan, as Ian said. I'm CEO and co-founder of Sotaog. Um, we're actually a SaaS business where we've been backed by AWS and Google, and we use machine learning models to analyze a lot of operational cash flow data, which is sensor data, real-time data. And then we try to predict inefficiencies. We connect it to, hey, what's the impact on the cash flow? And we rank them. So we love what we do. A little geeky, but yeah, happy to discuss that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, every business cares about cash flow a whole lot, or if they don't, they should. And I'm curious, I know your background coming from, I guess it's oil and gas. And is the software particular to that industry, or have you broadened that scope then to, because I know when I read about this, the software, we're talking about, enabling COOs
Right.
to, really understand the business. And then of course, you're talking about sensors, which makes me think there's some type of physical integration, on the edge or something like that. So yeah, I'd love to know the details of all of this because it's probably wildly complicated.
Yeah, I mean, it is and it's not. So, you know, um, no, it's not just in oil and gas. So actually, oil and gas is one of many in the heavy industrial space. So this is for
Okay.
any entity that makes something and sells it the same. So
Okay.
they use a lot of machines, but our software, we're software only. There's no hardware component to us.
Okay.
Just to clarify that, people always think, "Are you installing something?" And
Right.
then,
Right.
yeah, and I know they talk a lot about the edge. So my background was I started in 2006 in oil and gas, but it's called a PLC, right? And PLCs have been around for a very long time. Um,
Okay. What does that stand for?
Programmable logic controller. And today
Right.
the fancy word is, oh, it's the edge.
Yeah, right. 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 I don't even know if people still say that. I may be behind the times, but I know there are sensors out in the field that measure actual things and give you data.
And they're connected to a PLC. So
Mm.
when I went to school, it feels like so long ago now. In 2000s,
Not as long as I did. Right.
my background's in engineering. And that is a lot of what I did was learn how to program PLCs, which are
Okay.
programmable logic controllers that are in the field. And they bring in the sensor data. And you do very rudimentary logic inside the PLC. And then you can send the data out by a cell phone network or whatever else that you want to do. But yeah,
Yeah.
so every time I hear the edge and IoT, and I'm like, oh, that's kind of really cool way to, make it sound important. But
Right. But it's just this little device that measures something and sends a little tiny piece of data over the cheapest available wireless spectrum. Right.
yeah, and then, they say, oh, we deployed it on the edge. And I was like, and back in the day, we just didn't have fancy words like that.
I know, right? Yeah. Same thing with AI now, right? Everything's AI. So what used to be big data and then machine learning, and now it's AI.
Yeah, exactly. And who knows when it's gonna
And
be called quantum physics later.
absolutely, it should be. I mean, I'm a big quantum nerd, so if we go down that rabbit hole, it will be here for hours. So, yeah, I can get this, right? So businesses essentially are able to measure millions of different data points of all types of things in some kind of meaningful pattern of time,
Correct.
and it's every second, every real time, every hour, whatever it is based on certain industry parameters. I suppose if you're, I don't know, filling Coke bottles or something, you care about every bottle. But if you're doing, manufacturing of a giant piece of machinery, you probably don't need, up to the moment, actual perfect data of every single,
Right.
stroke of the machine. So all this data comes together. I imagine it's aggregated somewhere in some type of cloud. And yay, now we have lots of data. And how do we get smarter using it? And I think that's probably the big challenge, right?
Yeah. Um, that is a challenge, but tech has evolved so much.
Mhm.
So now, before like storage used to be a barrier, running computations
Right.
used to be a barrier. Like you can't run that many computations on the edge. And I've seen a lot of applications that say, oh, you can on the edge. You're still always going to be limited to what you have on the edge, unless you're going to put this big
Right.
supercomputer in the field, which no
Right.
one is going to do. So that makes
Right.
running all that in the cloud a lot easier and a lot less expensive. So
Right.
back then, we used to have big servers, and then the servers would get too full, and we'd have to upgrade the servers or like delete data, essentially. Because,
Right. Right.
um, but today, the cloud has simplified a lot of that. And anyone can store massive amounts of data. And now you can run massive amounts of computations. So the the detail is in how you connect the right data sets to run those computations and how you connect those computations to an actual impact on cash flow. And
Okay.
that's where the magic happens. And, the chief operating officer role, if you look in history, it's actually a very newer role. And they're
Okay.
typically technical folks that are trying to do this manually. They rise up in those positions and they're responsible for operating cash flow on a daily basis. That's your KPI.
Okay.
And it's a lot more impactful in heavy industrials where their pricing changes every day. Just imagine you make oil every day and suddenly tomorrow how much they're going to buy it changes.
Right. Right. Sure. Sure. So like the cost controls, if you didn't have real time data, would be incredible. Like essentially, don't run a thing that loses you money, but the data changes all the time that on
It's
on doing that.
analyzing that real time data. So real time data has
Yeah.
been
Right.
available for a long time. 50 years
Right.
ago, you can see a pressure change, but what's the impact? Like, does it have an impact? Like, just because it went from 0 to 50 psi, some have zero impact on production. Some have a lot of impact,
Okay.
right? And so it's how you connect those trends and the patterns and how you utilize all these little amazing tools that you have today and drive an
Right.
impact. So that's what we do.
And did you have to figure out how to put together that data since that essentially didn't exist in the past? The inability to have the compute meant that, well, you really wouldn't even be thinking about processing all this fast enough. Is there actually like a bunch of mathematical, essentially models first that you gotta go like, well, does it even matter? I don't know. Does it matter? Like, is it just a question of just smashing massive amounts of data and seeing back testing that data to see like, did it matter? Like, I don't know. I'm just amazed by this because I don't work in anything like it.
No, actually, there's engineering models that have been around
Mm,
again for 50 years. So, for example, you can look at the potential of an asset. And the
okay.
difference was they were large, heavy simulation models But now
Okay.
you can feed it with real time data and you can predict what that potential really is and how long it's going to last. So, yes, so these engineering models are not new. There's a lot of engineering equations. That's the first part that you build in instantaneously. And then you can do a root cause, like, for example, um, like a simple example was how we increased cash flow by 7% for in the heavy industrial space just by using pattern matching and OCR
Okay.
because
Right.
they were manually reconciling what inventory left. They had two different systems. So they had real time data, and then they had another system that warehoused this data. But a person still had to manually reconcile that cash. And there were two things, right? You're either big enough where you do it manually,
Right.
you hire people to do it, thousands of man hours. Or you're small enough, you don't, and you just trust the payments you get to be accurate.
That never went wrong. Yeah. Right.
So it's actually fun, and that's a very simple solution. And every time we deploy it, we'll find 3% additional cash because
Right. Right.
we use OCR to match the ticket numbers to the tank level drops, which has a very specific signature. Anyways, it's always fun when a COO sees that. Uh,
Yeah. Right. Right. And I mean, you're talking about industries where there is not a tremendous operating cash margin. So 3% might sound like, whatever, but we're not talking about SaaS margins here. We're talking about like an efficient market essentially for a commodity, right? So
and you didn't have to
not
make
just
anymore. See, the burden wasn't
right,
on making more product or being more efficient,
right,
just on getting paid.
right, right, right. So where did this come from? Because you decided to make a SaaS company after being in heavy industry and oil and gas yourself. So I always like to know how did you become, a founder out of engineering land? Because that's not always the path people take.
Yeah. I mean, well, I guess you could say I was always a little ambitious. And I mean, I started my career at Marathon Oil, which is one of the top 500s. And as a young engineer, I was one of many people, many technical folks. And I only did the execution part. I didn't really get
Okay.
to. So, anyways, my job was to get real time data, install sensors, uh, and manage PLC programming and get the data into our headquarters, right? Well, what I noticed was it never got used for efficiency. It's always like a simple example is a tank level in an oil tank, right? It was mostly used for, oh, is the tank going to overflow? I need an alarm and I need someone bit there.
Right.
But um, really, a tank level tells you how much cash you have on hand, what was sold, or how much oil left, etc. So it could be used multiple different ways. I went to a smaller company, so I thought Marathon Oil could do more with the real time data, right? And especially that we had chemical engineers in house and they were doing a lot of the process optimizations by hand. I just thought, well, if you could actually normalize a lot of this real time data, you could be doing it on the fly. Um, Anyways, I'll go to a smaller company because I'm excited and, I get to manage more stuff, right? So to give you an idea, Marathon makes 400,000 barrels of oil a day. And here's this little tiny company that makes 10,000 barrels a day.
Right.
So I go there and this is 2011 and they're manually measuring a tank. And I was like, why would you do that? I remember talking to the CEO, like, why would we do this? We're selling 5,000 barrels a day. And I told him how I guarantee him he was losing 3% because, there's no validation of a human person writing that down, right? You can't go to a court of law and say, oh, I'm sure they took X amount of oil. It doesn't exist. He said, well, let's do a test and we'll try it out, right? It was 7% that he was
Oh,
actually losing. And of course, all of that. And then, um, we got to deploy sensors everywhere. And I got to deploy wireless technology, which was actually a tenth of the cost compared to what I was doing. So, and then after that, I thought, the cloud was coming out. I thought we should do
yeah.
this as a business. And we got our first client and for $40,000. The rest was history.
My first big client was 40,000 too. That must be a magic number. So
It must be a
right about exactly that time too. So I'm tracking.
yeah.
Um, okay. So tell me, I love the founder stories. So like literally what's happening here. Like you're working at, this other job and you're like, okay, I found a problem that everybody's going to have. I think I can fix this. But what's the like, okay, like you met with your co-founder like at the kitchen table or, how many months is the planning and like, should we do this? Should we not do this? Like those stories always get compressed. And I love
Yeah.
dig into those early days. Like, did you ever think like, well, yeah, we should do it, but it might be crazy. And what if this cloud thing is kind of new? And, what was actually going on there?
Robert Estelle, I had met him. He was the vice president at Marathon Oil at that time. And when I had moved to
Mm,
the smaller company, he had moved on to be the CEO of a AIM-listed company out of London. And he was visiting Houston because he has a home here. And I met him and I said, hey, we should do this. Like, there's a lot of small companies in the United States, and not to give a lesson, but there's 5,000 small producers in the United States
okay.
that contribute to 65% of the oil made in the country.
Well,
And the big majors actually are responsible for about 35 to 40%.
which seems upside down, but
I know,
okay.
but a
Yeah.
lot
Good
of
to know.
folks
Yeah.
don't know that.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I said, there's a lot of business. There's 5,000 folks like this company. And I sort of fixed this one, but we should go check it out. And he looked at me and he's like, well, Sarah, you've got 4 months to go find a client, if that is true. And I said, okay. And yeah, 4 months we found a client. I convinced somebody to buy. And yeah. And,
The rest is history.
and looking back, I always thought getting the sale was the hardest part, but it's really implementation on a small budget was really hard because now you're trying to make margins and you've got to compete in the marketplace. So
Right.
yeah, all that was interesting.
Were there other competitors in the space who were already somewhat entrenched, or was it really like blazing a new trail? Like nobody knew, like it was category defining kind of thing.
Great question. So we started just by doing real time data, right?
Mhm.
And yes, it is a little bit of a crowded space. Like you've got Schneider Electric, you've got GE. They've been doing this for a long time. Our value proposition was we were going to be much cheaper, and our analytics was newer, right? You had to start
Uh huh.
somewhere.
Uh huh.
Well, we needed the data to see all the optimizations and cash flow we could do. And what
Hmm.
are the common data sets every company is trying to measure? Right? And what can you do with it? But I knew even back then when we started, and we differentiated ourselves by saying we're fixed pricing, our analytics doesn't look like the 1990s. It did take off because some of them couldn't afford it. And others that did, it was just very outdated and old. And, we didn't charge per user, we charged per asset. We said unlimited data points, right? So that helped us differentiate ourselves and create a little bit of a space for us. But I did know it was going to be very, very crowded. And 6 years later, that space of real time data, like now there's a kid in a garage that can do that, right? That's,
Right. Sure. Sure. Yeah. I mean, obviously, you had to innovate on like, great, we can get real time data and we can show a pretty dashboard. Now
right.
what?
Now we
Right.
have to make an impact on cash flow. And if we could do that, because we knew how to do that, and incorporate the engineering models. But I knew we would, and it did work. Like today, we manage 20% of the gas for a country, and
Wow.
yeah, and we've got a multi-year contract. So it's definitely a solution that um, is accepted in this space. So
So what surprised you as a founder? Good or bad?
um, it's way more difficult than anyone tells you, or like no one quite outlines the how hard it is. I think because I mean,
Only people that have done it, but the people who are new never listen to the people that have done it.
I think I don't know, but there weren't a lot of stories on how like
Yeah.
you always hear about the founders that made it, and then
Right.
the journey is kind of muted. It's not there isn't a lot of detail on that. And I think looking back, I wish someone had said, "Hey," and then now looking back, I meet a lot more um, established CEOs, and they say, "Oh, everyone's got those problems, it's the same problems." It's
Uh-huh.
like, why would someone like talk about them? Like hiring the right folks, having a culture. Like, um, I in the early days, I heard some brilliant folks because we were getting business, but they had the worst attitude. And I remember one particular, or one or two, and it's a small team, so you tolerate it because you think, "Oh,
Right.
I need to execute on this business, right? Or without them, I'm gonna fail." It's not really true because tolerating a toxic employee, it doesn't matter how brilliant they are, impacts your growth because as you expand the team, the other team members see it and they do the same. And I noticed, yeah, and that attitude catches on. So,
Yeah. Or the good ones just go, well, this is being tolerated, so I can go work someplace else.
right.
Because like it's just like I don't want to be in this and nobody's holding that person accountable. So I'm gonna go look for a different job.
Yes, exactly. Or they get a little lazy and they start to have a terrible attitude as
Yeah.
well.
I think it's easy for the whole team to act toward the level of the worst thing that's tolerated.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So,
Right. So did you have to learn to put the hammer down a little bit and fire some people
yeah,
or
I
do some
did. I
discipline?
did.
And that not a natural disposition for you? Because like you're sort of when you come from engineering, like you're just not taught a lot of these management principles
Exactly.
that just come from experience. And I mean, was that shocking or like did it come naturally or like, all of a sudden you're the leader, go.
No, it
You
did
know?
not come
So
naturally.
okay.
It was, and I think the harder part over here was some of them were older than me, though I was the CEO. You
Right.
have a lot of the other dynamics that are playing out where they do kind of intimidate you, and they're all men, of course.
Of
I
course.
mean,
Right.
not that women can't intimidate, but it just so happened to be that.
Yeah. Well, that industry isn't famous for diversity. So.
Well, in the technical field, it's mostly men. So,
Okay.
but they at least, and it's not all men. Let me clarify that. But this particular group, the two of them, they would let me know on a very regular basis how they were far better than me. I just got lucky. And if I didn't have them,
Oh,
this whole
jeez.
company was going to crash and burn, right? And during those times, it's hard not to believe it because it's 40 hours a week. But I had a good co-founder and we were able to clean that up and he helped me. Well, he did some of the firings for me. That helped. I,
Right.
and then at one time, I remember they had a bet going on for whatever. They said, we don't think Sarah's going to fire this person. And if she does, I'll give you a. Anyways, and I did fire that guy, but that was hard.
Sounds like you were motivated to make sure that the bet was won. So,
But in a SaaS business, your cash flow is very tied to productivity of people. You don't have
right.
instrumentation. You don't have a lot of other stuff. Right?
Ah, yes. Okay.
And I learned,
Was that interesting to find that out? It's like essentially coming from this place where real-time measurement of everything. It's like, oh no, how do we measure developers? How do we measure, productivity of humans? Like, was that sort of, that must have been like
And then,
rudimentary sort of for your engineering brain.
yeah, and we don't get taught finances a lot, right? Like, but it's really finances that drive any business.
Right.
And, cash flow, profitability. And if you can have good operating cash flow coming in to take care of all of your
Mm.
costs, you're an extremely healthy company. You never have to worry about anything.
Right. Yeah. Cheapest financing you can get is revenue.
Yeah,
So yeah. Right.
exactly. So, anyways, I learned a lot. And that was a tough period. Um, yeah. So,
And then cloud starts to develop, people are finally, AI winter's a little bit over. We can do things with big data that we couldn't do
yes.
before. Compute catches up with like your uh, ideal position. I imagine then like the innovation curve had to be pretty steep because probably, a lot of people were realizing that at the same time. So did you have to really
They,
focus on,
yeah.
developing more?
Um,
Yeah.
I focused on getting customer revenue instead of raising cash at that time. So there were two
Mm,
things I could do. I could either focus on raising money, which is also a
yeah.
full-time job, or I could focus on actually getting the product up and going because we had customers already and we had real-time data coming in. So I took that path, and I think, um, and then I cleaned up the team. So while I simultaneously did both, we were finally able to build out these amazing models that I had always envisioned to make an
Okay.
impact on cash flow, right? And so that was truly exciting. I think I lost a couple of years because of not having the right team and not being able to build it out. But I mean, looking back, I'm happy where we are. Like now
Yeah.
it's so
Sure. Sure.
everyone, there's a joke in the team. They go, if you want to be Sarah's favorite, you just have to outperform. It's very
Hey,
correlated, very linearly correlated to performance.
how have you learned to measure, essentially human teams like over that period of time? Because there was, even though you can't kind of gather real time data, you can have heuristics that you must have, developed over time from that experience. What are the things that matter?
What matters is, you know, well, what's most important to me is my team thinking on behalf of the customer every day. They see our customers interact with the product. And I'm
Right.
always looking for the developers. So early days developers would say, oh, you know what? That's an engineering model. How about the engineering? And I do have a few engineers on staff just to do that. How about they figure that out? This is not our job, right? And I was like, no, no,
Right.
you guys are like the biggest portion of our company. Spend most of the money on you guys. You guys have to think and be more proactive. And we made that a performance metric. Like, how do
Okay.
you contribute to the solution? Yes, the first wave of it was kind of built by Robert and myself because, Robert's, um, he's a C-suite executive and he had worked on multi-billion-dollar assets across the world. So yes, the first wave of it was us, but now we need all of you guys to contribute. So those are little things, and then you can measure the efficiency even with the tasks. Like if they try to go above and beyond, etc. There are a few different ways that you can look at it.
Yeah. Yeah. Did that ever feel limiting to you to not have like, like really good data, as an engineer? And then you're talking about doing sales too, which is, I mean, talk about things where there's kind of no good data where you're trying to, I do sales. I know this, like, it's just, I'm trying to gauge who am I talking to and what motivates them. And like, nobody's feeding you anything. You just have like, there's a lot of gut checking involved. And was that just like shocking or different or like what, it's like,
Sales is very
how did you
different.
develop?
Sales is very different. And Yeah. I mean, even today, I love building the product, but
Yeah.
um, I enjoy sales as well. I mean, it's most of what I do on a regular basis. Um, no, actually, as an engineer, when I started, we did a lot of estimations without data. So you can
Okay.
plug in a lot, and especially you have this real time data coming in. You can use anomaly detection. You can normalize that, and that's good set of data.
Yeah.
There's a lot of data that goes unused. So typically, the real time data today, 75% day in day out just goes straight into the garbage. No one's using it. Uh, and yeah, so switching to sales, that was different. Well, um,
Sales is about 90% garbage, right? It's,
and what was interesting was we did few partnerships, and they were supposed to be these experienced sales folks, right? Like they had 10, 15 years experience and they're supposed to be the best. And they worked at Oracle or wherever, these big companies.
Yep.
And I found myself outperforming them, right? And kind of went like, oh my gosh, what's going on? Like I'm learning sales from the ground up with zero
Right.
background. And the sales folks are not giving me any strategies or incentives. They're just more surprised on how I closed the sale. So that's like, okay.
So why am I paying you?
I know, right? So, so I had to self teach myself a little bit, like the ICB, your ideal buyer. My ideal
Yeah.
buyer was the chief operating officer. And then
Okay.
the sales team said, well, you can't reach those guys. So that's a terrible starting point. And I was like, okay. But then I showed him an example on how I closed a deal on LinkedIn. Like I sent COO a cold email. And
Yeah.
then they were like, well, what did you send? I said, I'm sorry. Like I took 30 minutes to understand the customer. I looked at your website. I saw where they were operating. And then I sent him a note and I said, hey, X, I noticed you're drilling X number of wells. I'm optimizing wells for customers right around right around your acreage for higher cash flow. So I think it's worth the chat, right? Or something along those lines. It's fun.
Yeah. Well, real personalized data goes a long way. And what someone from that actual background knows is how to talk about it properly. And a lot of the, big software selling people would get the door slammed in their face by not knowing the proper industry lingo.
But then some of them sold into oil and gas, but then they said that
Yeah.
we
Well,
sold to CIOs. I'm like, okay.
exactly. That's a tech sale. Yep. Now you had credibility, in the real world. Like, I mean, just the things that you just said to me, I wouldn't have known, count the number of wells, count the acreage. It's just like the way you talk about things matter. I think it's a huge lesson that actually knowing your stuff ingratiates you with the target customer if you thought about that, kind of ahead of time. And I see a lot of founders kind of hire salespeople, just like you said. And it's just like, well, if you're a practitioner from the space, like you're going to know it better than, anybody. And that's worth paying attention to.
Yeah, but I was hoping that at least sales folks could bring in the lead. And then I could do it from the second meeting, like sending that cold email.
Everybody hopes that. Yeah. Yeah. And I think,
Yep.
in that idea that, like we've got to go out and get people to pay attention and just take a meeting even. I mean, that's the hardest that to me, that's the hardest thing in business. And I do this for a living. Now I tend to be on the closer side, where I get to do the same meetings as you, it's like, look, y'all, marketing is important and outbound and whatever we need to do and inbound, make meetings happen because I want to take them.
Right.
And, but I think like everybody misses that point that I talk to, unless you kind of had that business experience, like that's a really hard thing to do to get anybody, particularly now the noise is so high. It maybe wasn't, 5, 6 years ago. But there's just a lot. You can't reach out to somebody on LinkedIn now. Nobody even reads it. Yeah. So,
True. But but I always felt like, I mean, even going back to everybody, like if I think folks just sat down and thought a little bit more about, instead of just doing canned thing, or like
yes. Yeah.
the strategies are there. I mean, that's how I figured it
Yeah.
out because I actually read a YouTube, the sales guy, and he said how he customizes each outreach.
Yeah.
He takes,
Personalization.
and it's something I didn't know about.
Yeah.
Uh, yes, it takes time. I'm lazy like everybody else. I don't want to do stuff.
Right. Right.
It's, it's adapting what was been proven to with.
You must have had the logical approach of saying, look, somebody does this, therefore I need to find how and I need to practice and I need to learn. And I think that's exactly how it happens with people that, aren't used to, kind of getting paid by somebody else, like to just sort of do only their part, and I think as entrepreneurs, very often we're just all sort of all the hats at the same time. Somebody, that's how I got into sales. Like, oh, somebody needs to sell this because nobody else is. So let's go.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, and business is hard, right? Like your customers want to pay you as less as possible and they want to get as most, most that they can. And how are you going to
Yeah.
compete and fit the business model? And, so those are all things I think sometimes as a founder, I wish someone told me that nothing's free, like, yeah, I've had customers beat me
There,
down on pricing quite a bit until like we
there's
had,
frictional cost of everything, no matter what should be easy, there's some kind of friction that slows it down and makes it more expensive or slower. And,
yeah,
um, I mean, did you have any sense of at the beginning, like, hey, this really works. And if we go to market, we'll certainly grow, this much. And this, it's not even like this much. I found that it's usually the time scale that shifts, like I was right about that. It just took 4 times as long. So
well, I think I fell into this common perception because, as a founder, we're very proud of what we built, right? And we just think, oh, if we put the product out there, they're just going to come flocking to you. Like, no,
the field of dreams.
yeah,
Yeah.
no, it
Yeah.
doesn't work that way.
They'll all call their friends and tell them for
Yeah,
me.
exactly. I, that's when you realize you got to tell the customer you're there 7 times before they even pay attention to you.
That's right.
Anyways, so yeah, those are all. Uh,
Well, God, thank you for going down memory lane with me. I think these conversations are important
yeah, I think
because the future founders need to hear this stuff. I mean, it's the real grittiness of, you always hear startups are hard, but you maybe don't hear why, and I think that's always interesting to me. And I've done 16 different companies and some of them were really bad. And I try to be honest about that story.
that's true. But again, more people need to hear it. And I run into founders that have closed their companies, right? And
Yeah.
they tell you why. And I mean, um, as a founder myself, I was in those situations. I just chose not to
Yeah.
give up because I felt like I had put so much in already. And I
Right.
was like,
Right.
I can't lose
Yeah.
all that work I put in.
Right. Yeah. And I think, preparing yourself to be able to, just financially withstand the ups and downs of starting up. Like if particularly if you're bootstrapping, like you need to get customers need to pay. And, you're probably the last one to get paid. And therefore, from your career or whatever you're doing before, bank that money
Yep,
because like that's capital, also because what you don't pay yourself is a hidden cost,
exactly.
because you can't replace yourself,
Exactly.
and so when you're working for free, a lot of people don't kind of accrue that. and think about it. Like sweat equity is real
Right.
and it's sweat, and there's probably some other names that you could give to it. It's like, wow, like I can't pay my home bills with
That's
that,
right.
so I'm creating future value, which is super cool. But if I can't backstop,
Exactly.
not having to have income, that's, really critically important.
Exactly. Uh, yeah, and it's a lot of yeah, and that's one of the unseen blind spots, right, that you're not looking at. And then um I mean, I haven't talked to too many investors, but the few that I did, oh wow, I mean, I think we had a limited where they came to us, but see their expectation uh, is
Right.
is
Right.
very different, right? They
Right. Right. Yeah. And if you can, it's rare to bootstrap a SaaS because it's expensive, and like the upfront cost is tremendous. And everybody should know that when you take VC, you have to grow at an extraordinary rate to make good on the valuation. And that itself, has an expense to it. And I hear founders talk about all the time. I took too much, I took too early. I wish that I had, raised differently. I just didn't know otherwise.
or get in with the right VC, and yeah, because there's so many intangibles that they value you on, and
Yeah.
uh, it's not based on like it's actually some of it is not based on how many customers you have and your revenue. It's based on what their perception of me is and my management.
Yep.
And there's a number around that. And it's just, yeah, it's just different. It's the world of business is a very different world. It's not ones and zeros like I think in engineering.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I think those are good lessons for the engineering founders, and find partners who know, the business side, and find partners who know the technology side. And, it's a lot easier to start businesses with, quality people as partners who can, kind of cover the bases with you. So well done on that one too.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, before we run out, and Sarah, thank you so much for hanging out. It's been a fun talk. I told you I like to ask all my guests, okay, you're the leader of a B2B company, and what's from your perspective, what's on your radar, so to speak? Like what's going to matter, to everybody over the next couple of years that just everybody in the audience should just take a moment and think and put that on their list.
So I think there is so much buzz about AI and ML.
Mhm,
I think what's going to get very clear in the future is how does that actually help the business?
mhm.
Like, it's great to have a very complex, fun, smart neural network that you can hold like a 4 hour of webinar on. Well, what's the actual impact of it? Why should I care?
Right.
And I think that's going to surface out really quick. Because today you have a lot
Mhm.
of brands that say, look at all those fancy things we do, which is great. But I think businesses are going to ask, how's that impact me? But the
How will it make you more money?
numbers are great. 75% of B2B businesses plan on adopting AI in some form or fashion in the next few years.
You can understand why everybody's rushing to sell it. But I think, yeah, like, we don't need 25,000 AI point solutions to, do what? Like, yeah. And I think what I see happen to markets, and I'd like to pay attention to, I think you totally nailed it in your business, is like, I don't think anybody cares very much about anything except making more money. And I think that it's a lot easier to talk about the further up you are in the income statement, your value prop is, the better off you are.
Right.
And, from a selling standpoint. And so I always try to think of like, if my selling proposition can't talk about revenue or gross margin, it's 10 times harder to sell it for something that reduces expenses or, drives greater
Right.
profit, because like you're just, it's a much smaller gain. Revenue can go up forever.
Yes.
Costs can only go down a reasonable amount. And I think that's the difference between, sort of buying a high growth stock versus, a short or something like that. So
Or a stable one.
yeah, right. Uh, Fantastic. Well, thank you,
Okay.
Sarah, so much. It's been fun. I
Thank
really
you.
appreciate your insights. I don't know if anybody out there is in heavy industry, but they should pay attention to you and your business if they are. Anybody who resonated, just about anything you said, what are the best channels to reach out to you if people want to do that?
So I'm very active on LinkedIn. I'm very social there. And yeah, send me a note there or, send me a note to my email address. We're still small enough where I still respond to a lot of relevant emails. Okay.
All right.
But I enjoyed this so much and I enjoyed your perception. I loved the little tidbits I heard about your background and sales. And that was really cool. So thank you.
Well, thank you so much for coming out and being a part of it.
So